This video we're going to talk about how to establish the pecking order of your elements on the design space. So you can see I have a layout where I have a very large image with a semi-large headline and then the body text and the logo. And you can see how I kind of arrange elements. This is a pretty standard visual for the layout, and we recognize this relatively often especially in magazine layouts, but across multiple types of layouts, you'll find this. And when you look at this, you realize, obviously the image is important, and then the headline's important, and then we try to minimize the body text as much as we can to kind of not make it so heavy, and that's the balance with the large image. And then the logo. But what you want to consider is that there's other options to creating a layout, and sometimes maybe it is taking an image and making it a little smaller, and then considering a heavier headline to kind of mend those two things together. And the headline stands out because of space around it, as well as the size of the image kind of helps a balance a little bit more. And then you have the text and then a logo. And this is a little different than the previous page where it had the very large image and a smaller headline, and minimizing the text again. You can even take out, if you had the option, take out some text and rebalance with some more white space for the headline, and making it a little bit more prominent as far as the headline goes. So, image doesn't have to be the large element. It can be the headline itself. And then, keep considering other options for establishing the order of importance. Again, thinking about that hierarchy. So in the instance of maybe it being the headline, that would be important, and then think about how your image can maybe take on a shape, and if it takes on a shape, that kind of establishes it as well. And then putting in your text and playing with the text a little bit to see how it would run in the design space to kind of help that information adjust itself, and evaluating the importance again of what is the order. What do you want people to see first? In this instance, maybe it's more of the headline. So if we just take the image and make it a little smaller, leave it centered so you can see that. And obviously the wrap helps the image be seen very much. So something to consider, if I take out some text, and I'm going to minimize it a little bit more to give the headline some space. Also you can consider maybe a little bit larger of each the leading and the point size. So if I take it up in size a little bit more, to kind of set that off. Or in the reverse, how about I make it a little smaller with much more leading? It kind of handles things a little differently as well. So you can create the visual to draw based on just essentially figuring out what element is going to be the importance message. So we started off with a very standard looking layout, and then we went to something that was a little bit more maybe in balance with the image to the headline, to the body text, and then took on a different even sense where the headline became very large, gave a shape to have consistency in the shape of the logo to the text itself. And then, we can again maybe strike a balance a little bit more. You can see that I'm using my guides to kind of get my elements into position. And when we strike a balance, there's nothing wrong with that. It's actually not a bad way to design. Unfortunately, it tends to be a little boring when we create something that's more like this. You can see the image is well within its space, it's small, it's in alignment, all great principles of design being used, but kind of boring. So that is why it's important to kind of think about how you can arrange the overall elements on the page and consider the pecking order a little bit more. If I take out some text, and I have the luxury here of being able to take out some text for the simple fact that I'm just demonstrating. Sometimes you don't have that option. Sometimes you're required to put so much in. But don't forget about white space helping as well. So if I just increase leading, and this is something that a lot of people don't consider as an option as much as considering the increase in leading to help kind of gauge the idea of adding in a little bit more space for the eye and for the elements. And so you can see that now I've kind of created a nice balanced, aligned, structured layout, but again, a little boring. Taking on some of the elements, changing the size, such as the headline, thinking about shape a little bit more, all the way down to thinking about the typography itself being the element that you want to have engaged. And stroke type is hard, but again, knowing the rules to break the rules. So consider some options if you're going to do something such as a stroke to shape, to see if it's going to work or not. I'm just going to put a color in there, and sometimes the stroke will work, sometimes it doesn't. Also think about the size of that stroke. What size is that stroke going to be? Is it to help it pop? Strokes aren't bad, but we want to minimize how much of it that we have to look at. And so say I make it very thin, well, the color still pops and the stroke kind of helps. In this instance, reducing the amount of kerning would be important, and making some assessments to equal out that kerning space, making it optically the same as between the T to the H and the other letters in there. So these things also aid in how we're going to kind of go about creating that element that's going to help make the design pop, and think about things in a little different way. And if you bring in an image, how that image position, this time maybe I'm going to put the image more offset, and then that logo, getting it in there as well. Again, for demonstration purposes, I have the luxury of removing text, so I can always get things pulled in. But now you can see the headline has become the element, and I've kind of thrown, the other elements out of different types of alignment. It's no longer structured. Sometimes maybe the logo would be to the far right. Pull that in. You don't want to create oddities like that, so you just want to make sure that you be careful that you don't create odd shapes, because then now those become actually visual draws, and that's not something you ever want to create, is a visual draw based on a strange shape that you've created. So think about the headline more as being the focal element versus the image or one word in the headline. to draw the eye in, and then think about how this is centered aligned and how you can off balance that with a right alignment. And then finally, thinking about white space more, which again is a challenge when you're getting started, and thinking about how the elements can really sit by themselves and have that white space dictate how it's going to work. And in this instance, a very large image with a lot of white space around it, very tiny, tiny headline. Logo never changed size because logo, should be addressed in the way a logo should be for a given company. So, seeing how these kind of weigh themselves out. With a logo, you're thinking about more of an ad. Again, with an ad, you can really minimize the amount of text. Most of the time, it's just a paragraph, with 3 or 4 lines, whatever it may be. Keeping it simple. If you can adjust the amount of the elements and stuff like that, consider that. And then you'll notice that none of my elements are dead center. They're more of a situation where I have a 2/3 area, and so I'm working in my thirds, which helps with a composition, a very comfortable composition. So again, figuring out which element actually will work and why it makes a lot of sense, and looking at the variety. Again, using the headline more, one word in the headline, changing the alignment, deciding which is going to be the element people are going to be drawn into, yet overall trying to make people draw through the whole entire composition. That is the ultimate goal. Yes, you pull in with a focal element, but you want to make sure that you continue the eye movement and the various ways that you can actually go about that varies, and experimenting with the elements that you have to make that happen is an important step in developing your concepts.